And a lot of that is related to another key concept known as Atman, the idea of the non-self. Atman, of course, in Hinduism referred to that expression of Brahman that we often think of as the individual soul. But within the Buddhist teaching, there is no essential, unchanging, interior entity at the center of a person. There is no notion in Buddhism of an eternal soul. So that, with respect to that, there should be no thing to be attached to, no thing that should be desired. Essentially, when it comes to the self, a person on any turn of samsara is a combination of 5 elements, or skandhas: the physical body, the feelings, the understanding, the will, and the consciousness. And so these 5 things come together to make up a person on a particular turn of samsara. But there is no notion of endurance in an eternal way of any of these things. It's a very difficult concept to get and try to explain. But often, early Buddhists use the example of a chariot to try and explain it. A chariot, if you kind of break it down, it's got wheels, it's got the framework, it's got ropes, it's got the spokes in the wheels. But no one part of a chariot is considered to be a chariot. If I held up a wheel and said, "Is this a chariot?" you would say, "No." Right? That's a wheel. The same kind of thing applies to the Buddhist conception of the self. Pointing to a physical body. A physical body without feelings, understanding, will, and consciousness is not a person. Now again, in the West, we would probably say that consciousness is connected with the soul. Right? So consciousness is the soul. That's the person. Well, consciousness is not the person. Because in the next turn of samsara, any sort of consciousness that extends from one life to the next will be combined with a new will, a new understanding, new feelings, and a new physical body. And that makes a person. So there's nothing eternal about a person. Now, yes, there is some, the consciousness does kind of extend into the next life, but it's not unchanged. It's not the same complete eternal consciousness. But the fact that it continues that's where karma is kind of connected. Right? Karma kind of continues because it's connected with a specific consciousness. Now again, we might say, well, isn't that, though, a person? But just like a wheel is not a chariot, a consciousness is not a person or Buddhist. Again, it's kind of a difficult concept to get our minds around and to try and explain as Westerners because we are so used to the idea of, that voice in my head, that place where I think, that's truly me, and that's what's going to live on. But for Buddhists, that's not the case. But instead, the self, just like everything else, is marked by impermanence. The self is impermanent. The world around us is impermanent. Our relationships are impermanent, right? Everything we can think of is impermanent. But everything in our lives is also interdependent. The picture for this, to try and suggest this, is of a wheel made up of usually 12 components or 12 spokes. Again, you don't necessarily need to get the terms down, instead hopefully kind of getting the concept. Essentially, the idea is that each of these conditions has an impact on our lives. Things happened in our past life that have led to present situations which are leading to things that we are doing that will affect our future life. So we had ignorance of the way the world works, of reality, of the self, of detachment, and that led to that aspect, right, that little thing that carries on. So at that, we had those mental formations that continued on, that became a new consciousness, that were then combined with will, feelings, a new body, which gave us senses, right? There's six senses in the Buddhist concept, which now leads us to come into contact with things through our senses, which gives us feelings. Right? So we have senses, so we have feelings about things, which makes us crave or thirst or desire things, which will lead to attachment, which will put us in a position of we're not going to escape samsara, we are going to become somebody new. Right? There will be a new birth, there will be aging and death, and the wheel just keeps on. Right? And so our ignorance of impermanence, our ignorance of how what we've done in our past life is affecting this life, and if we don't change it, right, if we don't spiritually exert ourselves to discover the truth about this, the insight, the wisdom that we need, we're just going to keep spinning around and around on this wheel, being reborn life after life. Questions about this idea? Anything I need to clarify so far? Also very important, as we suggested already, is that human beings, as Buddhists, be moral. Morality is key on the steps to the path to finding nirvana. It is important to make good karma. We'll talk about karma here in a minute. And popular stories in Buddhism emphasize that one should act morally to all beings, because Buddhists also consider the world to be eternal, and so at one point, all the beings we come in contact with in a life have been our parents, or they have been our children, or they have been related to us in some way. So act morally toward all people and all beings. When it comes to the issue of karma, there are certainly similarities. That kind of good consequences proceed out of good actions, bad consequences proceed out of bad actions, but there are slight differences. For example, most Buddhists would say not everything that one experiences in life is dependent upon karma. But on the other hand, you should do good deeds to offset karmic destiny. They also deny the position found within Hinduism of karma and caste. I mean, they live in a system of caste in India. But anybody, regardless of caste, can achieve nirvana. Unlike in Hinduism, where karma explains why you are in the position you are in. Within Hinduism, karma is related specifically to actions. Very physical concept. Within Buddhism, karma is more an energy from action. Right? So it's more of a psychological concept than a physical one, which of course is different from the material concept of Jainism, where karma is material particles that attach itself to your soul. Questions about any of these doctrines? Anything we need to clarify? let's move on then into talking about the third gem, the Sangha. The Sangha, again, refers to the community, those that follow the dharma, or the teachings of the Buddha. There are essentially two parts in the Sangha. The monastic community, monks and nuns, and common people, lay people. And just like in other communities, monasticism requires a high level of devotion. And you're changing your entire lifestyle practice, turning to a very simple type of lifestyle. And like in other forms of monasticism, taking a variety of vows, chastity, poverty, separation from the world, living in a monastery, for example. The global Sangha, the worldwide Buddhist community, has experienced a variety of separations beginning as early as the 4th century BC. Essentially, there are three major schools. At one point, there were like 18 different groups of Buddhists. And a lot of the major splits in those early years had to do with how an individual became a part of the monastic community, what kind of vows they had to take, what they could and could not do as monks. And so a lot of it had to do with that. But there was a lot of working together, living together in the same kind of monasteries. But essentially today, there are three major types left. There's Theravada. Theravada predominantly found in Southeast Asia, so places like Vietnam, Laos, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Certainly, of course, Theravada Buddha is found elsewhere, but as far as concentration, Southeast Asia, Mahayana, East Asia, China, Japan, and then Vajrayana predominantly in Tibet, although there is a significant diaspora of Tibetan Buddhists in India. We'll talk more about that when we come to Tibetan Buddhism. Of those 18 schools back in the 3rd, 4th century BC, the only one that continues to survive is Theravada. The term is a Pali term that means the way of the elders. So it's a rather ancient form of Buddhism. It is believed to be the oldest living form of Buddhism, the one that has the most age to it. There were modes of Buddhism that were older, but they have died out, at least apparently. And as the oldest form, as the tradition of the elders, the way of the elders, it tends to be a rather conservative form of Buddhism. And so the Theravadists believed that it was very important for them to try to maintain Buddhism in its original form. And quite possibly, the practices of Theravadists are closer to what the Buddha actually prescribed. More modern forms like Mahayana and Vajrayana have innovations. There have been newer things that have been added. As I mentioned, Theravada predominantly found in Southeast Asia, places like Vietnam, Cambodia, Sri Lanka. A main focus for Theravada is on study and meditation with respect to the Four Noble Truths. Vitally important for the Theravada to focus on these truths, meditating, coming to deeper insight, but especially through monasticism. In Theravada Buddhism, it is emphasized that one must become a monk or a nun, or predominantly a monk in Theravada, to achieve nirvana. That there's just so much in a person's regular life that they cannot achieve nirvana. that you have to be totally detached, essentially, from the world, so you can focus on meditation. But it tends also to be a rather individualistic form of Buddhism. The ideal person in Buddhism, in Theravada, is the arhat. The term means something like worthy one. This is someone who has or will achieve nirvana through self-effort. And so this is a person who has, on their own, brought themselves to nirvana. The second major type of Theravada Buddhism, or the second major type of Buddhism, is Mahayana. Mahayana, however, is an umbrella term for other types, and we'll talk about some other divisions within Mahayana, but as far as an umbrella term. The term Mahayana means greater vehicle. It's more about universal salvation, getting as many people as possible to nirvana. It begins to develop around the 1st century CE, the Common Era, or AD, and started to refer to older forms of Buddhism, including Theravada, as Hinayana, a lesser vehicle. By the 4th century, so within 300 years, it had become the most prominent form of Buddhism, particularly through traveling to East Asia. But in addition to the numerical difference, there are other differences as well. For Theravada, the emphasis is on the monastic life to achieve liberation, to achieve nirvana. Mahayana forms argue that common people can strive for and achieve nirvana. Theravada Buddhists tend to focus predominantly and exclusively on the historical Buddha. Just pay attention to him. Within Mahayana, many forms of Mahayana, Siddhartha Gautama is just one manifestation of Buddhahood. There have been others, scores of others throughout time from Mahayanas, who have achieved enlightenment, who can serve as examples. Within Theravada, the emphasis is on personal effort. But within Mahayana, the heavens are filled with spirit beings who are willing to help. These individuals are known as bodhisattvas. The term bodhisattva means something like enlightenment hero. And this is someone who could achieve that final nirvana, but chooses not to in order to help others. Right? So they could be, experience that release into the universe, but they want to see other people experience nirvana. And it's the fact that they're willing to forego this final nirvana that demonstrates the freedom from desire that they have, their detachment from themselves, and the fact that they embody the compassion that is so important within the Buddhist community. Let's go ahead and quit there. We're quitting a little bit early, but we'll go ahead and finish up there. We'll pick up a week from today, talk more about some specific types of Mahayana, and then get into Vajrayana as well as some Buddhist practice. Don't forget, no class on Tuesday. Third review essay on Thursday.